Ethan Clarke and Marissa Lowe never should have taken that road. They thought it was just a shortcut, a lonely strip of cracked asphalt cutting through endless fields of dust and silence. But halfway down, with the gas gauge sinking low and the sun bleeding out across the horizon, they realized something was wrong. There were no signs, no houses, no power lines, nothing but the feeling that they had driven straight out of the world and into a place that wasn't meant for people to find. And when they finally saw the broken gas station standing alone in the distance, it didn't feel like a rescue, it felt like a trap. The road stretched endlessly ahead of me, a straight line that cut through miles of barren fields and rolling dust. I had been driving since morning, but by now the sun was tilting west, bleeding the sky into bruised shades of orange and purple. My phone was useless, stuck on a screen that said no service, and the GPS app showed nothing but a pale grid where the road should have been. Every so often I'd glance at the gas gauge, and each time the needle had crept lower, threatening to strand me in this place I didn't even recognize. The silence pressed in through the windows. No birds wheeled overhead, no insects buzzed in the grass. No sound of life at all, just the faint hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on uneven asphalt. I thought about turning back, but I couldn't remember when the last town had been. I couldn't even remember seeing another car for hours. It felt as though the world had emptied itself of people and left me behind to wander alone. Then I saw the sign. It was leaning against a splintered post, almost swallowed by tall weeds. The paint had faded to a ghostly smear, but I squinted and made out one word carved into the wood: Hollow. The arrow beneath pointed toward a narrow dirt road. My first thought was relief. If there was a town called Hollow, there might be gas, maybe even someone who could point me back toward civilization. Without thinking too long about it, I turned onto the dirt road, gravel popping under my tires. At first it seemed endless, cutting between empty fields that stretched all the way to the horizon. The sky above me deepened into streaks of crimson, and the air outside looked heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. I kept expecting to see a farmhouse, a barn, a telephone pole, anything, but there was nothing. Just earth and sky and the sound of my own breathing. When I finally saw the shape in the distance, it almost didn't register. A low structure crouched at the side of the road, barely visible in the fading light. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it left me dizzy. It was a gas station, or what had once been one. The roof sagged dangerously, and the windows were covered with sun-bleached plywood. A single pump stood out front, tilted at a strange angle as though the ground beneath it had shifted. I pulled in and parked. When I stepped out, the heat hit me like a furnace, stale and thick, carrying with it the sharp scent of dry weeds. The wind had died completely. I approached the pump, running my fingers along the chipped paint, but then I noticed something that stopped me cold. Words had been carved into the metal, not painted, not sprayed, but gouged deep with something sharp. They were jagged, uneven, almost frantic. I leaned closer to read them. Don't stay after dark. For a moment I just stared. The letters seemed to shimmer in the last light of the day, like they were alive with some kind of warning I wasn't meant to ignore. My stomach knotted, and I glanced back at the horizon. The sun was half gone now, melting into the flat expanse of land, its glow slipping lower and lower. The silence around me grew heavier, deeper, like the world itself was leaning closer to listen. The station looked abandoned, forgotten for decades, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had left that message for a reason. I told myself I'd just wait until morning, that I could manage one night in the car, but even as I thought it, unease coiled in my chest. The thought of the night swallowing this place, of sitting here in complete blackness with nothing but that warning carved into the pump, made my throat go dry. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the empty fields, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, not even the whisper of the wind. The sky dimmed further, shadows crawling across the land, stretching like fingers reaching for me. The air was colder now, unnatural for a desert evening, and a shiver traced my spine. I climbed back into the car, locking the doors even though I was alone. The needle on the fuel gauge hovered below empty, and my phone screen was dead black. The last sliver of sun disappeared beyond the horizon. That was when I felt it. A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like something vast had stirred awake in the dark. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The car was nothing more than a fragile box of metal and glass, and as the darkness spread over the horizon, it felt smaller and weaker by the second. I told myself over and over that I just needed to wait out the night. That morning would come, and with it the safety of daylight. But the words carved into that pump gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Don't stay after dark. Whoever wrote that had been desperate enough to scratch it into metal, to leave a warning for anyone foolish enough to stumble into this place. I tried turning the key again, praying for a miracle, but the engine gave only a hollow cough before dying completely. My tank was empty, the car useless. Panic flared in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. There had to be something in the station, a can of fuel, a phone line, anything that could get me moving again. The station door groaned when I pushed it open, the sound loud enough to echo in the night air. Inside, the air was heavy and smelled of mildew, thick with dust that clung to my throat as I stepped inside. My flashlight beams sliced through the gloom, and the beam revealed empty shelves sagging under the weight of rotten time. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved slowly past the counter. The glass of the display case had shattered long ago, shards glittering faintly beneath layers of grime. Then I noticed the scratches. The floorboards behind the counter were covered in them deep, jagged grooves etched in frantic, overlapping circles. They looked like claw marks, but they weren't random. They spiraled inward, as though something had been trapped there, spinning and tearing until the wood gave way beneath its strength. I crouched down, tracing one of the grooves with my fingertip. It was sharp, so sharp it nicked my skin, and I jerked my hand back. The cuts couldn't have been old. They looked fresh, as if whatever had made them had only been here recently. The beam of my flashlight wavered across the back wall, and my breath caught in my throat. There was writing there, uneven letters painted in something that looked too dark, too thick to be paint. The words stretched across the boards like a plea. "IT comes when the sun dies." I stumbled back a step, nearly tripping over the counter. My heart slammed against my ribs, and my mouth went dry. Whoever had left that behind had known exactly what I was feeling right then, the dread. The certainty that the darkness itself carried weight and purpose. I killed the flashlight without thinking, as though the beam itself might attract attention. The silence outside had deepened, not the silence of an empty place, but of something waiting, listening. I held my breath and strained my ears. Nothing. Just the sound of my own pulse hammering in my skull. I forced myself to move, retreating through the doorway and back toward the car. The lot looked different in the dark, wider somehow, emptier. The shadows stretched too far, folding into one another like curtains. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, though I knew locks meant nothing if something wanted in. I tried to keep my breathing quiet, shallow, as if anything louder might break whatever fragile barrier was keeping me hidden. My eyes stayed fixed on the horizon through the windshield. But the night pressed against the glass, too thick to see through. It was like sitting at the bottom of an ocean of blackness. And then the sound came. At first I thought it was the wind, a faint moan threading through the silence, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't wind at all, it was voices. Soft, overlapping whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My skin crawled as the words slid just beyond recognition, too faint to understand, but close enough to feel in my bones. The whispers circled the car, brushing against the glass, weaving into the seams of the doors. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't stop them. The voices weren't just outside anymore. They were inside my head. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to block it out, but the whispers swelled, wrapping around me like invisible hands. Just when I thought I would break from the pressure, they stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before, heavier, and in that silence I felt it something standing just beyond the reach of my vision. Slowly I opened my eyes, and in the rearview mirror I saw movement. Something tall, impossibly thin, was standing at the edge of the lot. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just stood there, watching. The figure stood at the edge of the lot, frozen in the high beams of my imagination, a smear of shadow given shape. At first, I thought my eyes were tricking me, conjuring shapes from the blackness the way the mind does when it wants to fill the emptiness with something familiar. But this wasn't familiar. Its arms were too long, reaching nearly to the ground, and its shoulders sloped unnaturally forward as though weighed down by something unseen. Where its face should have been, there was only a pale blur, featureless, blank, like a mask stretched too tight. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the dark, some jagged pole or half-dead tree that my fear had warped into something alive. But then it tilted its head to one side, a slow, deliberate movement, as though it was studying me. My stomach twisted. I couldn't look away. The whispers came back, faint at first, curling like smoke inside my skull. They rose in layers, overlapping each other, voices without breath, without bodies. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the intent. They weren't calling to me. They weren't warning me. They were telling it what to do. I fumbled for the keys and turned them in the ignition even though I knew the tank was empty. The engine gave a guttural cough, then silence. My heart thrashed in my chest. The figure took one step closer. Not fast, not slow, just enough to close the distance between us in a way that felt inevitable. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the flashlight, but I flicked it on anyway and aimed the beam toward the edge of the lot. The light hit the figure directly, and for a split second it vanished. My breath caught. Relief shot through me, but when I turned the light, even a fraction to the left, it was standing there again. Closer now. I screamed without sound, scrambling backward in the seat. The flashlight dropped from my grip, the beam rolling across the cracked pavement and spilling into the weeds. The shadows seemed to ripple with it, swallowing the light as quickly as it spread. Then something tapped against the glass of the passenger window. A faint, deliberate sound, tap, tap, tap. I whipped my head toward it, but the window was empty. Nothing but black pressed against the glass. My chest heaved as I waited for the sound again, but the tapping stopped. I leaned forward, sweat dripping down my temple, and scanned the windshield. The lot was empty. The fields beyond swayed slightly in the stillness, though no wind stirred. I dared to breathe again, shallow and uneven. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had never been real. Maybe I had imagined all of it. The rearview mirror told me otherwise. The figure was standing directly behind the car, its long arms brushing against the trunk, its head bent too close to the glass. For one sickening moment, I thought it was inside the car. Its reflection stretched where mine should have been. My skin went cold, and every muscle in my body locked. I blinked and it was gone. Silence again. The kind of silence that felt alive, waiting. I didn't dare move. My hands clutched the steering wheel, though I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Minutes bled into each other, or maybe they were hours. The dark outside thickened until I couldn't tell where the horizon ended and the ground began. When the sound came again, it wasn't tapping, it was scraping. From the trunk, a slow, deliberate drag of nails against metal, vibrating through the car frame, crawling into my bones. I pressed my forehead to the wheel, willing it to stop, but the sound only grew louder. I reached for the door handle, every instinct screaming at me to run, to put distance between myself and the thing outside. But before I could pull it, something shifted in the corner of my vision. The glass of the driver's side window fogged, as though someone was leaning close, breathing against it. Letters began to form, traced by an unseen finger, 3 words scrawled in dripping arcs. You were chosen. I stared at the words on the window until the letters began to blur. My breath caught in my throat, and I wiped at the glass with my sleeve as though erasing them would erase the meaning. But when the fog cleared, the words were still there, burned into my vision even though the window was clean again. I gripped the door handle and yanked it open, stumbling into the night air before I could stop myself. The silence outside hit me harder than the stale heat. It felt thick, pressing against my skin, making every movement heavy. I ran without looking back, crashing through the brittle weeds at the edge of the lot, the ground uneven and soft beneath my shoes. My flashlight beam jittered across the fields, catching glimpses of pale stones, broken fence posts, and nothing else. I wanted distance, any distance, between me and the car, but the land stretched on forever, flat and endless. My lungs burned as I ran, but every direction looked the same. The whispers returned, not faint this time, but louder, chasing me across the open field. They rose and fell like waves, always just behind me, as if they were part of the air itself. I pressed my palms over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't outside. It was in my head. I tripped on something hard and went sprawling into the dirt, the flashlight skidding out of reach. My hand sank into the soil, soft and loose, and I froze. There was metal beneath the dirt, the faint curved shape of something buried. I clawed the earth away, desperate for anything that might make sense of this nightmare. My fingers scraped against rust, and then the beam of my flashlight rolled back across it, revealing a car. Not mine, an old rusted frame half swallowed by the ground. The windshield had shattered, the roof collapsed inward, and inside, slumped against the driver's seat, was a skeleton. I couldn't move at first. The skull tilted at an angle, the empty sockets staring directly at me as if it had been waiting for me to find it. My stomach churned, and then I noticed the clothes. Torn, frayed, and eaten away by time, but unmistakable. They were mine. The same faded jeans, the same shirt I was wearing, even the same scuffed shoes. I staggered back, nearly falling over myself as bile rose in my throat. I turned and ran again, leaving the buried car behind, but the farther I went, the more I saw. Another rusted vehicle, then another. Some were broken beyond recognition, twisted heaps of metal scattered across the fields like bones, and in every one, a body slumped behind the wheel, each figure wearing variations of my own clothes, different cuts, different states of decay, but always me, always me. The whispers grew louder, excited now, circling around me until the air seemed to vibrate with their weight. I screamed at them to stop, though no sound came from my throat. My voice had been stolen, smothered by the night. I stumbled back toward where I thought the gas station had been, but the fields looped into themselves, bending in ways that made no sense. No matter which way I turned, the horizon never changed. The gas station was always just out of sight, flickering in and out like a mirage. At times, I could see its shape in the distance, leaning and broken, only to vanish the moment I tried to move closer. When I finally saw the glow of headlights, I felt relief wash through me, raw and desperate. I sprinted toward the light, weeds whipping against my legs. My own car sat waiting in the middle of the lot, doors locked, headlights blazing. I slowed, confused. I had left it behind, but here it was again, waiting for me like it had never moved. And then I froze. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. My breath caught and I took a step closer. The figure inside turned slowly toward me, its face illuminated by the harsh glow of the headlights. My stomach dropped. It was me. Not a reflection, not a trick of the glass, but me, skin pale, eyes hollow, lips pulled into a grin I didn't recognize. The door on the passenger side creaked open as though inviting me inside. From the field behind me came the sound of something dragging itself through the weeds. Closer and closer. The door hung open, yawning like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. My double sat behind the wheel, unmoving, the faint grin frozen on its pale face. The headlights carved cruel shapes across the lot, bleaching the ground and leaving the edges swallowed in blackness. I stood there trembling, my body torn between running and giving in, but the sound behind me made the choice impossible. Something was dragging itself closer, the crunch of weeds bending under weight, the faint scrape of limbs across dirt. I turned, the flashlight beam shaking violently in my hand. The grass rippled, though there was no wind. Shapes moved within it, black forms crawling low, slithering, writhing. The whispers surged in my head again, louder than ever, overlapping, crushing my thoughts into static. They weren't words anymore, but a command, a pull, dragging me toward the open car door. My double's grin widened, lips peeling back too far, teeth glinting in the artificial glow. I staggered backward, my heel catching against the edge of the pavement. I nearly fell, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure in the driver's seat. Its hands tightened on the steering wheel, long fingers curling against the leather, though it hadn't moved a muscle otherwise. The whispers told me I belonged there, that I had always belonged there, that this moment had already happened more times than I could understand. I thought of the cars buried in the earth, each one holding another version of me, each skeleton frozen in silence, as though trapped forever in a cycle that could never end. My knees buckled and I dropped to the ground. The weeds pressed in from the edges of the lot, quivering as though something enormous was forcing its way through them. A shadow loomed, stretching impossibly long across the cracked pavement, even though no shape should have been able to cast it. It reached me, covering me in its cold embrace. I couldn't breathe. The car door slammed shut without me touching it. My head snapped up, and through the windshield I saw myself still inside. My other self stared at me, eyes dark pits, smile unwavering. The headlights flickered once, twice, and when they steadied, I saw movement in the rear seat. Something shifting, pressing against the glass. A black figure folding itself into the space where no body should fit. My double didn't react, didn't flinch, only kept smiling, as though it was waiting for me to accept what I was seeing. I tried to crawl backward, but the ground itself seemed to resist me. The pavement rippled under my palms, softening like wet clay, pulling at my hands as though it wanted to drag me under. The whispers turned into laughter, then high, thin, echoing in every direction at once. It filled my ears until I couldn't hear my own breathing, couldn't hear the blood pounding in my head. When I looked back up, the lot was no longer empty. More cars surrounded me, their headlights snapping on one by one, forming a jagged circle of light. Each car held a driver, and each driver was me. Dozens of faces turned toward me, pale and lifeless, grins carved into their features. Their eyes glowed faintly in the beams, hollow sockets lit from within. I spun in place, trapped, my heart slamming like a trapped bird. Every exit was blocked, every path leading only to myself. The figure in the grass finally broke through the weeds and stepped into the circle of light. It wasn't tall anymore, it wasn't faceless. It had taken my shape, my size, my stance, but wrong bent at angles that made my stomach twist. It joined the others without a word, its grin identical to theirs. I screamed then, though I couldn't hear it. The laughter swallowed everything, echoing inside me, filling the sky, the earth, even my bones. The headlights burned brighter until the world itself went white, and when it faded, there was only silence. The cars were gone, the lot empty, the gas station nothing more than a shadow at the edge of vision. I was standing beside my car, alone again. The door opened just as before, but when I leaned inside, the driver's seat wasn't empty. My own body sat slumped behind the wheel, skin gray, mouth twisted in that impossible grin. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the bones had split through the skin. The eyes rolled toward me slowly, deliberately, and though the lips never moved, the words filled my head like fire. You were always here. The headlights flickered once more, and everything went dark.